And welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin, and we are here live on the Enlightened World Network. So today's topic is faulty foundations, and it should be an interesting conversation. We operate under certain assumptions individually and culturally, and these unexamined assumptions uh, are treated like their truth, and we often don't question them. So we're going to have the opportunity today to explore some of those assumptions and maybe ways that we might be able to make them visible so that we can experience greater freedom, greater autonomy, greater choice. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant bright light, lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, faulty foundations. I think that we get to look at some of the inherent prejudices. We've been talking about this lately, but some of the inherent prejudices of our culture that are so frequently unquestioned. So, a biggie is this notion of rationality and rationality reigning supreme over emotionality, like this polarity that's been created between rationality and emotionality. And it's typically identified with gender, although that's not really the case, right? So rationality is perceived generally as more masculine and is elevated, is considered superior to emotionality, which is considered feminine or a female, more of a female trait. And the thing that we get to look at is this separation of self from self, right? If we're separating our rationality from our emotions, we're separating self from self. And we also get to look at the notion that there is such a thing as rationality, which we don't seem to question. You know, we argue rationality versus emotionality, but we don't really question the notion that rationality may not even exist. And for the most part, what we can recognize is that we make a determination, we make a decision about something we want, or we have a pull towards something, and then we work to justify that, to argue it. We've talked about that this week. But the thing is that those decisions aren't driven by this pure reason. And the thing is that I was just hearing someone talking about how their feelings guided them to know what's right. And that's really true, that without feeling into our decisions, without feeling into our experience, we don't have, we're kind of cutting ourselves off from a deeper knowing, a deeper awareness that can help to, or that does really act as sort of a North Star to allow us to have a sense of what's right and what's wrong. We feel it. We feel it. It's funny, even I don't know if you've had the treat of seeing some of the videos on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram of dogs that have like ripped up something in the house, and somebody comes home and the dog is just cringing and knows that it has done something that it wasn't supposed to do, and it's got feelings, and this is without anybody hollering at them, but just saying, who did that? Who did that? Did you do that? And they just sort of cringe away because they know, they have the feeling, there's a shame or embarrassment or fear or some kind of something going on over there, that they know that they did something they weren't supposed to do. So, and it's not necessarily the fear of consequences either. They're not getting beat up or hurt in any way, so, or threatened even. So this notion that rationality exists is a really important foundational falsehood, faulty foundation that we really need to look at, because we use rationality to justify so many things. And I have to talk about science, because science really is people trying to understand how things work. And what somehow we made a transition to say that science is not exploration and working hypotheses, but somehow science is fact. This is fact. And the scientific method is the only method that can access truth, right? But how, when we stand back, can we revere a scientific method as truth, or as the only valid measure of reality, if it doesn't account for all of reality, if it doesn't account for human experience, if it doesn't account for things that we don't have an explanation for, like psychic phenomena or out-of-body experiences, or near-death experiences, or all kinds of other knowings. How can science be the be-all and end-all or the scientific method be the be all and end all if it has to discount a whole bunch of reality for its validity? And yet we treat it like a religion. We treat it like it is like it's just the way things are. And the irony is, I mean, it's just such silliness that we have bought this premise, hook, line, and sinker somehow, to say, well, if you can't prove it, it doesn't exist. When, for instance, with the mystical traditions and such, we have eons of history of experiences that people have had throughout time. So how valid can a science be that doesn't account for that, right? But that's like it's a crazy hypnosis that we have fallen under, not to invalidate the discoveries of science at all, but to be holding them in a very different way, to be holding them as we're just trying to figure things out. We're just trying to understand this. And the interesting thing is that so often the way that we go about trying to understand things is by dissecting them. So, to try and understand a living creature by dissecting it kills it, right? So there's something missing. It's kind of like when you talk about when you can identify the position of a particle, then you can't any longer identify its velocity. It's like if you're trying to understand a living system and you kill it to be able to understand it, there's something wrong with that picture, right? So faulty foundations. This notion of emotion being something lesser is a really important thing for us to look at. Oh, this is okay. So when I was growing up, I had alopecia for the first time when I was about 11 or 12 years old. I'd have spots on my head that were bald, where the hair had fallen out. And at the time, it was called alopecia nervosa. And I was told it was psychosomatic. So what does psychosomatic mean? It means sort of body and spirit, right? So if we look at any kind of dis-ease or some kind of physical out picturing, isn't it psychosomatic? We talk about body, mind, and spirit like they're separate things. It's all connected. It's all inextricably woven together. So the notion, the way that psychosomatic was translated at the time anyway, is it's all in your head. Well, guess what? What isn't? So it may be in my head, but it's also in my body. My head is part of my body. We start our conversations every day talking about with the grounding exercise to bring us into this body, which is the way that we experience life. And so many of us we've been conditioned to this body-mind separation, talking about this meat sack that we're walking around in. But the I that I think I am can only exist, is inseparable from this body in terms of the experiences that I have in this world. Because all of those experiences are through the body. Even if we're meditating and getting out of body, it's still inextricably linked. So we were talking about genetics. the other day with in one of my client conversations. And what was really fascinating, because we're so conditioned and programmed to dismiss the unexplainable as woo woo and to denigrate it and minimize it as woo woo, because which means like we don't have to pay attention to it. It's just silliness, when in fact there's such a broad information base, database about all this supposedly woo-woo stuff, that it probably far exceeds the knowledge that we have around our modern day science, to be discarding ancient sciences like acupuncture or homeopathy or any of these other kinds of awarenesses in deference to quote unquote modern science. It's like they all exist in the same reality. That's the interesting thing. Anyway, this person, we were talking about genetics, this person was telling me that during the war, their father had an injury. I don't know if it was during the war, but their father had an injury where part of their finger had been wounded and the nail grew back with sort of an angle to it partway through the nail. And he said, and the strangest thing is that on that finger of the same hand, I have something similar. It's not as extreme, but there is that angle, even though he had never injured his finger. He had this quote unquote aberration that was reflective of his father. And so the question is there a gene for that? Is there a fingernail aberration gene? Or are we talking about morphic fields somehow? Like what are genetics? We're finding through epigenetics and neuroplasticity, and that these things we think are fixed, like that genes are kind of the be all and end all influence, that in fact they're not so fixed. And we can have a genetic predisposition to something because there's a way that we can trace it through our lineage, but that isn't necessarily immutable, that these physiological outpicturings and conditions can be shifted through different states of being. And so an example of that is spontaneous remission, which there are all kinds of documentations of spontaneous remission where someone has a terminal disease and they have just a very brief period to live. And then all of a sudden, this impossible transformation takes place, impossible in massive air quotes, that then they are healthy, like from terminal stage 4 cancer to no cancer at all. Or from, so this person was saying, well, diabetes, you can't just have, that's a genetic thing. Well, there are people that heal diabetes. There are people who heal cancers. There are people who heal all kinds of other conditions that supposedly are unhealable. And what is it that makes that happen? We've all heard of the placebo effect, right? And the placebo effect is saying that because you believe that something is going to work, it works. And the placebo effect is often used in a very dismissive way to say, oh, well, that's just the placebo effect. But it occurs to me like that is the effect. That is what is healing us ultimately, whatever it is that is at the heart of the placebo effect is what is creating our physiological transformations. And also our emotional transformations. So when there's belief, there's a very, very different energy, a very, very different experience of reality. And we operate differently and our physiology changes. We all know that our physiology changes when we are joyful or when we're angry or when we're full of sorrow. Our physiology changes. And so it's just so funny to me. Like now we all recognize the impact of stress on health, that there is a direct correlation between high stress and dis-ease. We know this now, right? But in the past, and even still, people have all these weird kinds of symptoms, and the doctors don't know what to do about it or what it is. And so the doctors will say, well, it's all in your head. Well, what does that mean? What does that really mean? And I think, for instance, if we were to be like we have the assumption, and this is the assumption largely at the foundation of Western medicine, is that the body is a mechanical system and a mechanical chemical kind of system. And we can just correct it by reorienting the mechanics or shifting the chemistry through pharmaceuticals, for example, even though there are all kinds of side effects from the pharmaceuticals. And we don't necessarily take into account the mental and emotional components of health. We treat conditions. And so the underlying assumption, false assumption, that I think we can obviously say, I mean, it's so silly to think that we live in a machine that we don't affect, or that we're not intimately, inextricably connected to. I mean, if you think about it, it's silly. Because if that's the case, who am I that's inhabiting the body? Right? Who am I that's inhabiting the body? And we talked about who I am is life. Life expressing itself through this unique vessel. But truly, to imagine that the body is something separate from ourselves is a very, very silly kind of notion if we just look. It's not, it can't be. There's, I mean, everything that we believe ourselves to be, everything we experience in life is coming through this physical form. And so since we know that our physiology changes when we're upset, how can we imagine that we can just fix this physical thing as if it's something other? How can we imagine this without addressing the whole? It doesn't even begin to make sense, really. You know, there are mechanical aspects, but how can we begin to, you know, how did we all get hypnotized into that notion? It's really interesting. And so I think it's so valuable to find our way into discovery, you know, to find our way into looking at these foundational assumptions rather than arguing over is it body, is it mind, is it spirit, when it is all of the above, right? Like, I mean, how can it not be all of the above? Anyway, I think that that's our conundrum. And it opens up a lot of possibility. It opens up deeper connection, to be questioning and to be starting to think about the things that people don't even think about, don't even question, because then we can create a real foundation that's not built on quicksand, you know, to generate. I mean, we've come really, really far with the foundations, as flawed as they are, with the foundations that we have. And there's wonderful things that medicine has been able to do and wonderful things that science has been able to do. But there's a place where we hit a wall and need to go back to basics to say, well, wait a second, what if this thing that we've assumed to be true isn't really true? So anyway, that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living. And please like and follow both the Enlightened World Network and my YouTube channel. The links are in the description. And I just want to say how deeply I appreciate the opportunity to be musing together, these morning musings, and exploring life and consciousness. And until next time, so much love to you.